All right, I'll go ahead and get started. I'll first like to introduce myself. My name is Edward Henley. I am the Manager of Budget, Finance, and Administration for the West Riverfront Project. I'm here representing the project management team down there on the site. I'd also like to introduce the other members of the team there. First and foremost, Scott Potter, who's the Director of Water Services here, and he'll also be giving the presentation this afternoon. Casey Cooper, who is here with Water Services as well. I'd like to recognize Kim Hawkins, who is the representative for the lead design firm, Hawkins Partners, on the project, as well as Shannon Lambert, who's here with Barge Wagner, the engineering firm. And near the back, sitting down next to Kim, is Dennis Georgatos, who is the project lead for Skanska USA. They are the CM for the project. They are currently working with us on the amphitheater and will also be the lead CM when we decide to start hitting the ground running for the flood project. I want to start with the photo you have behind me, which is an image of the areas affected by the 2010 flood here in downtown Nashville. One of the things you also aren't able to see is a lot of the damage that occurred beneath the buildings due to a lot of the sewer backups and a lot of the stormwater drainage backup, which Scott will definitely touch on in his presentation. The other thing I want to do, especially for this group where we're located, a lot of the information that you've received over the past couple months related to the West Riverfront Park has all come out of a grant that was partnered with the Downtown Partnership and the Convention Center Authority when we decided to do a Sobro master plan of the entire area, largely due to the impact of the Music City Center being placed downtown, but also just to kind of get the city ready for what the downtown Nashville area should be expecting as we continue the growth. And one of the major components of that was flood mitigation as a result of the 2010 flood. So from that, we had also decided to continue on with the master planning for the West Riverfront. And inside of that study, there was a large commitment and key driver of flood mitigation in the downtown area. So as you look at a lot of the renderings you see around me, one of the ones I definitely want to point out is the one to my left, which is the areas that will be really addressed and touched on as we begin construction. Will basically be a lot of involvement inside the First Avenue corridor, and want to make sure that you guys are well informed of the things that will be going on there. There's a lot of coordination, a lot of answers that we'll have to give. We have a lot of questions, and we want to make sure you guys have the ability to ask those. And one of the things that Kim and I had talked and spoke about is making sure that we continue to come back and keep the downtown partnership involved and up to date as we move through the construction. And also, one of the things as you walk around and look at the renderings, I want to make sure you guys take a look at the one on my far right, because that is a representation of what the completed product of the park and amphitheater, as well as the flood pump station that will be incorporated into the park, looks like. And those people are actually to scale. So I want you to kind of get a magnitude in the sense of the type of construction and the type of infrastructure that'll be going down there. But I won't hold you guys much longer. I know you guys came to hear about all of the flood mitigation and how that affects you all as residents of the Downtown Partnership and members of the Downtown Partnership. So I'll turn it over to Scott Potter.
Thank you, Ed. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Potter, Director of Metro Water. I'm going to go through a pretty detailed presentation about how it's going to work. And what I'd like to do is keep this as informal as possible. If you have questions as I go along and something doesn't make sense, please just raise your hand, sing out, and we'll make it as clear as we can. I'm going to start with a video to remind us something hit really close to home for y'all, the flood in May of 2010.
It was a natural disaster not seen in 1,000 years.
The flash flood caught Nashville, Tennessee off guard, drowning the city's downtown in the muddy waters of the swollen Cumberland River.
A vengeful storm that devastated a modern American city in just 36 hours.
President Obama has declared a disaster area in 10 Tennessee counties.
From the beginning, this spring storm on an otherwise normal Saturday seemed different, more intense, more deliberate. Experts said it was a stalled frontal boundary coupled with moist air from the Gulf. To Nashville residents, it just seemed angry. Before it was through, 10 Nashville residents would die, succumbing to floodwaters they never could have imagined. In Nashville alone, damage estimates started coming in at close to $2 billion, almost equal to an entire year's economy for the city.
A lot of the buildings I happen to be involved in downtown were heavily damaged, the Skirmahorn being the main one.
More than 2,700 businesses were forced to close temporarily or permanently because of flood damage, affecting almost 15,000 employees and resulting in lost revenue of almost $4 billion.
We have an event that many cities could not have survived through its government, through its civic leadership, just the initiative from our wonderful mayor. Nashville has done things that other cities just dream of.
Since the deadly weekend of 2010, Nashville has experienced a renaissance that truly is the envy of other cities. Record growth, a new spirit, and a national buzz have catapulted the city to new heights. But to those who survived those 36 hours in May of 2010, the memories of the flood are never far behind.
As the video pointed out, $2 billion worth of damage in downtown, $4 billion in lost revenue. And one of the key things that we're going to point out is that downtown has become a place to live. And we have a significant growth rate of people who want to live downtown. It's a 15% growth rate since May 2010, which furthers the necessity, in my opinion, of protecting downtown. So what have we done since? The key thing to note, Ed pointed this out in his remarks. In the summer of 2010, this process began. We've been working on this project since, and we've incorporated a whole lot of projects. A lot of plans have been incorporated into the downtown flood protection system. It started with the Unified Flood Preparedness Plan. That was a product of Barge Wagner, Sumner Cannon, and a lot of partners. One of the things I want to point out is we have not done this in a vacuum. Metro Water Services has worked with all the metro agencies, the National Weather Service, the Corps of Engineers, the Coast Guard, and the U.S. Geological Survey to make sure that all the bases were covered in the planning process, to make sure that all the stakeholders had a place at the table. One of the 22 damage centers that were identified in the UFPP was downtown, and in that plan, the use of a flood wall and a pump station was specifically mentioned in the Downtown Flood Damage Center. The next plan that was put into place is the Sobro Master Plan. That had a direct link to the UFPP with the flood control component of it. And the next plan, the West Riverfront Park Project, had a reference of the Sobro Master Plan, which referenced the UFPP. So there's connectivity between all the plans. Each one of the plans had a flood control element associated with it. When we announced the West Riverfront Park Project, the mayor specifically mentioned the flood wall. So one of the things I wanted to be very transparent about was this project has been visible and I guess a component of all the plans since the summer of 2010. One of the important things to note about this presentation is all of the graphics represent what actually happened. So in this case, the blue obviously represents where the water got in May of 2010. And one of the things I want you to do over the course of the presentation is I'm going to ask you to be a drop of water on occasion and kind of walk yourself through your life as the drop of water after you hit the ground until you get to the river. And also we're going to talk about floodplain storage and how much water fell in the drainage basins and how much water we have to control. I very strongly feel in that statement. As an engineer, I'm convinced that we can do this. The design is sound and the constructability is sound. Everything we're proposing is civil engineering that's not cutting edge. That doesn't mean it's basic, but it also does mean that it's proven. We're not trying to invent the wheel with this project. We're using proven technology to prevent this from happening again. All right, so I'm going to go through the construction of each one of the components that's necessary to build the flood control system. Key thing to note, I said system. Each one of these components have to be built. If one of them is not built, then the system will not work. That is I guess that leads to the conclusion that we can't phase this project. We have to build the whole thing or it won't work at all. But first, we're going to go through a little bit of history. This diagram shows, is a schematic, the little shaded area is what flooded. And then I'm going to have to step away from the microphone a little bit, and I'm being recorded by Channel 3, so this will go, I guess. This is a storm sewer. This is a storm tunnel. That's what flooded. This little line here is the First Avenue tunnel. So kind of when I talk about that, those will be reference points. All right, so first thing is the Wilson Springs sewer. Back in 1880, the city of Nashville was having a horrible health problem. All of the sewage from all the homes and businesses were going into outhouses or into the streams and creeks of the city. That was causing typhoid, dysentery, all kinds of horrible diseases. So a somewhat brilliant response to that from an engineering perspective was to take the sewage and put it into a sewer that was constructed on the Wilson Springs branch. So where that sewer is now was a stream. And all the sewage in that neighborhood was taken to the stream, which was made into a sewer and taken directly to the river. So now that sewer is still in service. It's separate now. It's just drainage, but it goes into the river. So part of what Ed mentioned, the river backs up through that storm sewer, and that caused a lot of damage. We have to correct that. That's the first part of the history. The second is the Wilson Springs storm tunnel. As you can tell, it's a lot bigger. It's 12 foot 6 inches, shaped like a horseshoe, and it was a response to chronic flooding in the Wilson Springs drainage basin. A good way to think about where the drainage basin starts is 8th Avenue Reservoir. So if you start 8th Avenue Reservoir and you walk in pretty much a straight line to downtown, everything around you is that drainage basin. So we have to take care of that as well. Then we have the First Avenue Tunnel. Okay, in the late 1940s, early 1950s, the Corps of Engineers constructed the Cheatham Dam. One of the things that people really don't realize about the Cumberland River downtown Nashville, it's not really a river anymore, it's an impoundment. There's a dam at the exit of the county and a dam at the entrance of the county. So it's an impoundment. So the river doesn't flow like it used to. So now all the sewage that was going into the river through the Wilson Springs sewer, as an example, stagnated in the river and made it worse. So at that point, the city made the decision to build the central wastewater treatment plant, which is still in operation at the north end of 2nd Avenue. So we had to build the First Avenue Tunnel, which intercepted the sewage that came down the hill in the First Avenue Tunnel, in the Wilson Springs Tunnel as an example, and took it to the central wastewater treatment plant. We have to account for that as well. The easiest thing to visualize in a flood control system is a flood wall. The yellow line is being constructed right now in the West Riverfront Park project. It's going to be incorporated into the design, and it won't look like a flood wall. It'll look like a place to sit down, but it'll function as a flood wall as well. The orange line is going to be a temporary flood wall that's only put up when we construct it, and that is represented here. These will be permanent, and they'll be architecturally significant, and then it'll look like that when we put it together. And I've got a video that shows how that's done. Cool thing is it's all incorporated into the park design, so it won't look like a flood wall when it's not being a flood wall.
Will it keep you from being able to walk through there? Or?
No, ma'am. So here's what it'll look like. On a typical pretty day, you've got 2-scale people that are biking and walking beside the flood wall, so it'll look like that. They'll be lighted dramatically at night, and I guess you can bump into them as you're walking down the street, but they won't be a hindrance to First Avenue. And I think they're kind of pretty, actually. And this is how we would construct it. Okay, so 10-person crew, 8 hours, that's constructed. If y'all remember, during the flood, the river didn't get up until Monday. So we had plenty of time to get the flood wall up. The Opryland Hotel, Gaylord, and the Grand Ole Opry have built this exact type of system. It's used in Europe, Amsterdam, with great success. And like I said, it's not like we're doing something that's really cutting edge. I like to say that even I can put this up without messing it up. We'll put it in a box, put it on a truck, take it downtown, and I'm already quoted in the paper as saying I won't have the guts to wait as long as the operating plan says before we put the wall up, so we'll get it up first step. And that's how it'll look when we're done. So one of the questions I got earlier, I guess last week, was when do you take it down? And the whole point is when it's up, we won't be in a hurry to take it down. We can take it down whenever we feel like it. That's what it will look like on the side view. And the key thing here is this right here. That's the ground. This is subterranean. And one of the problems with Nashville, it's not really a problem, this is kind of real reality. This is porous rock. It's called karst, and the water drops can get from the river underground to the buildings and defeat our purpose. So we have to go anywhere from 10 to 30 feet down and build a cutoff wall to prevent that migration. That was done at Wolf Creek Dam when the Corps built their project in the northeastern part of Tennessee. So this technology isn't cutting edge either, but we have to build that as well. All right, so I'm going to toss out some pretty significant numbers. I'll kind of cut to the punchline. The total is $100 million, but the flood wall is $13 million. All right, so as we go along the presentation, I'm going to construct the system and tell you what's happened. So now we've got the flood wall up, and absolutely nothing has happened. Okay, because if you think back to the early part of the presentation, we've got the storm sewer that's hydraulically connected to the river, we've got the storm tunnel that's connected to the river, and we've got the First Avenue Tunnel. So this is step one that's necessary, but it certainly is not sufficient. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Wilson Springs storm system and how we're going to mitigate that risk. Okay, here is First Avenue Tunnel. I'm sorry, that's 8th Avenue Reservoir. This is the drainage basin. So everything in red is 580 acres. A good kind of visualization about how much water we're talking about, we had 1 inch of rain equals 16 million gallons of water. So key thing to note, if you're a drop of rain and you land in the red, you are going to the river, okay? What we're not doing is keeping you out of the river with this project. We have to get you to the river. This is how we get you there and how quickly you get there. So everything in this red, you're going there. Okay, that's the Wilson Springs storm tunnel outfall, and that's the storm sewer outfall. On a day like today, you can go to the east side, look across the river, and you can see those outfalls. All right, so now we're going to plug the storm tunnel and we're going to plug the storm sewer. So what's going to happen now is if you land here, you get in that tunnel and you're riding down the pipe, you're not going to get to the river. Okay, we're going to plug that pipe. Now that's going to introduce a problem because we still got to get you to the river. So we'll get to that point eventually. Okay, those two structures, $4.8 million. Okay, now we've got the flood wall constructed, we've got the storm sewer plugged, and we have the storm tunnel plugged. Now we're going to talk about the First Avenue Tunnel. Remember, that's the sewer that was constructed in the 1950s to convey the sewage from pretty much downtown to the central wastewater treatment plant. We have to install a flow control structure here and here. It's really simple to visualize this. We have a 6-foot diameter tunnel that conveys sewage. We're going to plug it at both ends. And if you stand in the river, like let's just kind of pretend we can stand on the water in the river, you'll see a little bow in downtown with a pipe that kind of goes, it follows the land. We're going to plug it here and here. So now we have a tunnel that doesn't function anymore as a conveyance. This is a big deal because that's 55 to 65 feet. That's a person, so it's drawn to scale. So we've got to go all the way from grade up to 60 feet in the ground in solid rock. So that's a lot of blasting and putting rocks from one spot to the other. It's expensive. It's not very complicated, but it takes a lot of effort. And we'll install a flow control valve here. And it'll actually be 2 valves because we want to have redundancy. One of the things I'm going to talk about is how do we make sure this works. If we're going to spend $100 million, the last thing I want to have happen is we build this thing and it didn't work. So the flow control valves will have 2 valves at each location. They'll both be electrically operated and manually operated. So worst case scenario, electricity goes out, we're down there cranking the valve and it closes. And we close both of them. Okay, so now we've closed the First Avenue tunnel at the upstream and downstream location. We put up the flood wall. We plugged the storm tunnel and the storm sewer. And that's going to cost about $18 million. That's the graphical representation of it. Okay, so once again, closed, closed, plugged, plugged, flood walls up, and we made it worse. Okay, because the reason we made it worse is when we plugged the First Avenue tunnel, we increased the size of the drainage basin, which leads to the most expensive and the most critical part of the system, which is the pump station. So the way to visualize this, you're a water drop, you land in the basin, you, excuse me, you go down the hill and you stop, essentially, you gotta go somewhere. Because with a flood wall at this point, we've isolated the river from the city, but we've also isolated the city from the river. So we've gotta get the water that falls on the upstream side to the river. The drainage basin has increased by 100 acres to 680 acres. So that necessitates the construction of a pump station, which is represented here. I'm getting a lot of grief about this because I said in my first presentation that's how it would look if an engineer designed it. But the good news is it's going to look like that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this and point out on a normal day, if it's a nice gentle summer breeze, summer rain, your water drop comes out there. Okay. When it's raining cats and dogs, you're going to come out one of these holes, and those are pumps. Okay, so there's 8 pumps that'll essentially throw the water over the wall. Is the way to kind of visualize it. It's a good thing we have Kim Hawkins around to make it look nice. Okay, now we talked about redundancy and making sure it works. The key thing here is power, because they're really big pumps requiring really big motors. Good news is during the flood, the power supply for the pump station didn't fail. So if we had this installed during May 2010, we would have had power available because we have 2 services providing power to what would be the pump station. Well, we're not comfortable with that because we need an emergency system. We're going to install, in partnership with the Downtown Energy System, the standby power generation system, 7.5 megawatts of power that will be contractually obligated to Metro Water in the event of our needing it. When we don't need it, which is hopefully all the time, DES will use it to shave their electric costs. So it won't be sitting idle. DES will use it as a cogen facility to make steam and chilled water, and it'll knock down the cost to y'all because their electric costs will go down. We'll pay the difference. So what we'll do is we'll do an analysis that would establish how much it would cost us to build it, Metro Water to build it, versus how much it costs DES to build their entire system, and we'll pay our share. Okay, that's $65 million. So that's why it's so incredibly expensive, but it's incredibly necessary as well. Okay, so now let's review where we are. First Avenue Tunnel upstream, downstream is, so the tunnel's isolated, that's plugged, the wall is up, the pump station is constructed, everything is hydraulically tied to the pump station. So if you're a drop of water, you hit the drainage basin, you end up in the wet well for the pump station, and then we pump you over the side. So now, it's going to work, okay? I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens to the East Bank with all this, and the key thing there is to think about this. All that blue that was here, that water has to get to the river. So it's not a question of putting more water into the river. We're doing exactly the same thing. All the water that was going is still going to go. So the way to visualize it is the storage of the water that was on the other side of the wall is lost. So we got to take the water we would store there, and we're getting there. We have to put it on the other side of the flood wall and then disperse it over the entire drainage basin. So this will take just a few seconds. While this is loading, do y'all have any questions thus far? Yes, sir.
When you talked about down First Avenue, you said the depth going into the rock is going to be 10 to 35 feet. So you'll basically have to blast there too and put that wall in, correct?
Correct. I mean, it may not necessarily be blasting. We have to get rid of that rock somehow. All right, so now we're going to talk about the East Bank. Okay, on a nice day like today, we talk in elevations. The river is at 385. And what that means is it's 385 feet above sea level. That's a normal day. The river is moving at 4 feet per second. Here's the west side, here's the east side. So that's on a day like today. Okay, during the flood, the river went to 420, essentially, from 385 to 420. And that spilled over the banks, and this became storage, and that became storage. You've probably heard me reference floodplain and floodway before, and the way to think about that is you see the river moved at 6.71 feet per second. That's 1.4 million gallons per second, by the way. That's moving. You can tell this is not and that is not, and that's floodplain. So you can go down to a stream, that's out of its banks a little bit, and you can physically see that. You'll see water moving, and you'll see a line in the water. On the other side of the line will be floodplain when the water is really not moving, and essentially Mother Nature is storing that water in the floodplain before it goes downstream in the floodway. So that's the problem when it comes down to we're going to be losing the storage here, okay, and putting it over here. So that's what it looked like. There's the flood wall. All the yellow is storage, okay? The water is still getting to the river. We're just losing that storage. Good news is we're taking that storage, which is 1.8 million cubic feet of water, essentially, that was in that storage, and we're putting it into the entire drainage basin. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, so, and that's 382 million square feet. So we're adding 1/16 of an inch. I realize that sounds a little bit crazy, but you got to visualize what's physically happening. If you can kind of stop time, and you take the water that's in the west side as a pool, and you pick it up in one handful, and you put it over the wall into the river, you physically can measure how much the river level will go up. And it's only 1/16 of an inch because of that number. There's that much storage available. So we're adding 1/16 of an inch. There's the generic explanation. So if we've got a baby pool that's 4 foot of water, we're adding half a gallon. That's the equivalent proportion. And it goes up 1/16 of an inch. It's exactly the same thing. That's the width of a nickel. So now we've got the flood wall up, the pump station. The measurable river level is not going to change. It's going up by 1/16 of an inch. So that's the numbers. And the reason we know it's 0.48 and not 0.47 is because we modeled it, and we're sure. This isn't something we guessed about. We're sure about that. So, the bad news is we're not helping the East Bank with this project. The good news is we're not harming the East Bank. And one of the things that we've talked about in the UFPP is that there are 22 damage centers. Downtown is one. The east side is another. We'll eventually identify and hopefully pursue a plan to alleviate that kind of flooding as well. This is a West Bank project. It does help downtown. It will work, and I think it's prudent. The bad news is it's $100 million. Good news is we're not going to pay cash for it. We're going to bond it. So it's a $6 to $7 million insurance policy, paid over 25 years. Personally, I'm obligated to do this. I think it's prudent. $2 billion worth of risk is not something I want to walk around with. And as an engineer, we can fix this problem. So I suggest that we do. So that kind of concludes the presentation. What questions do y'all have?
Scott, can you go back to what's going to happen on the East Bank with the system being put in place on the West Bank?
On the East Bank, I mean, you literally won't see a difference.
Okay.
It's the river level will go up by 1/16 of an inch, but it reverts back to the point where we're not harming the East Bank. I will readily admit we're not helping it either, but that's the next project. Yes, ma'am.
What's the timeline?
Okay. The design, right now we're at 30% design, and we'll finish design by midsummer, July, 1st of August, and we'll start construction at I would say the end of August. It'll be very non-dramatic when we start the construction process because the first step is to build a road to build the pump station. So it won't be very disruptive initially. But what we will do is we'll come down here periodically and update y'all about what the next week, the next month, the next 6 months hold in place. It is going to be a big deal. I mean, this is a significant project, but it won't be as disruptive as I think people fear because most of the work, especially on the pump station, will be from the river. So it won't be horribly disruptive. We will disrupt, as an example, the MTA, the bus station, the train station, things like that, and we will be in First Avenue a little bit. But like they did with the Music City Center, a lot of communication will be conducted with the Downtown Partnership and the city to make sure everybody understands what's coming. And yes, ma'am.
There are many buildings on the front on First Avenue that have garage entrances off of First Avenue. Will First Avenue still be passable by car to access?
I would presume that on occasion we're going to have to close First Avenue, but as a close it for a long time perspective, that won't happen. It'll be, I mean, Ed, do you have any? Yes, ma'am. I mean, we're not gonna barricade you in your home. It's like any downtown project, it'll be disruptive, but it's not going to be. I don't think it'll be horrible. I really don't. Yes, sir.
You're going to phase this in some fashion, correct?
Well, we'll be building everything generally concurrently because each portion of the project has to occur. The most long timeline part of it is the pump station, and it'll take the longest to build. But what we're not going to do is do the pump station and then start on the valves because we need to build everything at the same time.
No, I mean, well, obviously you can put up that temporary wall.
Oh, I thought you meant when we're constructing it.
It's probably a pretty easy thing to do. It doesn't impinge or affect anything else, right?
Well, remember, if we just built the wall and didn't build anything else, it wouldn't work.
Oh, of course, but that's what I was wondering. The wall, will that come first? You're going to do strictly the pump arrangement first?
We'll build everything at the same time. Yes, sir.
So when you talk about disruption, for instance, at Riverfront Station, I know MTA, when the circuit goes zero emission sometime this year or next, that is an anticipated location for a charging station. Will that impact the ability to use that?
The short answer is yes. We'll have to move the entire operation temporarily.
I might add, we've been meeting with MTA since November.
I mean, we're really all over the planning, but we just can't. I can't with concrete assurance say this will happen on Tuesday. You know, we're still at 30% design. Yes, sir.
What is the pump suction level? And for instance, like what parking garages do you anticipate would flood out, like the Omni, the Pinnacle? Because you're talking about a 30-foot steepage wall. At some point, you're only going to be pumping down to a level.
Yeah. What's the magic number, Shannon?
The bottom of our pump station is at 365, which is 20 feet below normal pool. Now, where that pump station will operate will vary on how much is coming into it, but the cutoff wall is there to prevent the under seepage to get back into the downtown area.
And the key bellwether to this is if you're standing at the Court of Flags on First Avenue and Broadway, and you look to your left, right in front of Acme, there's a storm drain right there. That's a 415.8. We're going to keep it. I mean, what's the pump operating level? Do you remember?
Well, we're going to keep it at 407.
407. So The entire objective to this is to keep the water out of your basement.
But I mean, have you done the analysis to see that, are there any anticipated that there possibly could flood out?
Yeah, I mean, I've got an entire other presentation that shows you how to work, and I'd love to show you. If you want to come, or I can come to you, and you come to me, and I'll show you how to work. What we modeled was, if we have this system and it fell out of the sky and it worked, we modeled it against the May 2010 flood, and we showed how we would operate it and what would happen. So I've got that presentation as well.
When do you project in putting this out for bid?
Construction will start in August, and this is going to be construction management at risk. So packages of bids will go out throughout the course of the construction. It won't be one giant project. It'll be packages of projects that'll be bid. Yes, sir.
So the May 2010 flood was obviously historic, 500 or 1,000 year flood, obviously. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. But I guess, how often do you foresee this being needed to be put up? I mean, I know it's impossible to put a number on it, but.
One of the things that I pride myself on is absolute transparency. And one of the questions I was asked last week was, would we have needed this system since May 2010? The answer to that question is no. Problem is, in 2013, in Madison, we had a storm event that was worse than May 2010, as far as the ferocity of the rain event. So the mayor, he doesn't like to say, but he says that during his administration, he had 2 500-year events. And that goes directly to risk, and how much risk am I willing to undertake as Director of Metro Water, and I know that we can build a system that will mitigate it. So it's literally a system that is designed as an insurance policy, and the premium is $7 million a year because that's the debt service. So from my perspective, it's a good investment. The Skimmerhorn, as an example, had $40 million in damage. You know, Pinnacle, brand new building, it filled with water. You know, it's just, are we willing to have that kind of reality? Because if it rains like it did, that's going to happen. So from my perspective, let's build it. What else? Yes, sir.
So the bond issue, $100 million, would it be guaranteed by the people that are getting Metro Water Services, that by those receipts?
They're Metro Water Services revenue bonds.
Great. So we won't have is the city involved beyond that, or just the Metro Water Service?
Well, they're Metro Water Services revenue bonds. So, I mean, to say the city's not involved isn't really accurate because, I mean, but they're not GO bonds. They're revenue bonds. And so it's a Metro Water Services project. We're working with, you know, a lot of partners to get it done. But when it comes down to it, it's a water and sewer project. We do them all the time. It's a lot of money, but this isn't the most expensive one we've done. We've done others that are more expensive than this. We can do this.
Last question I have, how do we help you make this go fast, smooth, and be quality?
If you got to have a checkbook with a $100 million balance in it, you could.
Short of that.
I would just be encouraging to your elected officials, and if you're asked by a member of the media, be supportive. It's a lot of money, and it's significant, and it's difficult for someone to, you know, hopefully it's not difficult to take me at my word that it'll work, but the whole thing is it'll work. But just be supportive is how you can help.
Well, the work you've done downtown with everything from busted water lines to whatever has just been phenomenally pulled off. The least amount of interruption to our businesses.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. It's that's the curious thing about infrastructure is it's messy. It's necessary, but you know, when you want to dig a hole in downtown, you know, it's downtown. It's a big deal. And that's why we're here. I mean, we want to partner with y'all, and downtown clearly is the economic driver for our city, and we need to protect it. Yes, sir.
If you start in August, what's the completion?
30 to 36 months. The key timeline is the pump station, and then, you know, building a pump station from a barge in the river, we don't have a whole lot of practice in that. Skanska does, but you know, we need to make sure we don't put it in backwards as an example. So it's going to take a little time to make sure it works.
I have a question. I came in late, but I'm just curious, like further north where there was some significant flooding in 2010, won't this exacerbate that?
Now, this project isn't going to help nor hinder any other drainage basin except for downtown. The key thing to kind of visualize is there used to be a stream, the Wilson Springs branch, that flooded. Essentially, that's what happened in the May 2010 flood. That stream that's now a sewer and that drainage basin flooded. So we're correcting the flooding in that drainage basin. Outside of that drainage basin, we're neither helping nor hindering. It's just, back in the day when Mr. DeMumrian showed up, he built the city here instead of going uphill, 4 blocks. That's called the Springs. So there's a lot of water. When we built Music City Center, we found a lot of water, and it's we just got to control it. It used to be a stream, now it's a sewer. So that's why it flooded. All right, well, thank you all for coming. I'll stick around for any individual questions. If you haven't signed in, please do so. And we'll communicate updates with you. But I really appreciate y'all coming. And if y'all have any individual questions, please come up and either I or a member of the team can answer it. So thank y'all very much.
It's a phenomenal presentation.
Thank you. Thanks.